Hello, everyone. This is Professor Marlene. That's why I'm having my professor glasses on. We are not filming outdoors today because it's raining. It's soaked through out there. And we have been on our walk. Sappho is on the couch sleeping. I can just turn the camera a little bit to you can see. There she is. She's not wet. She looks wet, but I have dried her off with her towel. She's a little moist, but what I wanted to talk to you about today is birchwood. And why do I want to talk about that? That is actually because a few years ago I was in a debate, not in a debate, but I was in a commenters trail to a video that a guy made, and I realized he was from the United States, and it was a video on forestry, on chainsaw, on lumber and timber and firewood, and of course he presumed that every participant in that debate was male. So I wrote something about how much I loved my birchwood as firewood, and he wrote, "Oh, this poor guy, he must live very up high north since he has to make do with birchwood." And I thought, what? What does that mean? And I started studying it and studying the physics of different sorts of wood and their value as firewood and their value as other um, purposes. So, of course, living in Sweden, I started watching. May I take off my professor glasses now? I think I will because they're reading glasses and I get a bit confused. um, of course, living in Sweden and looking around me, I could see that there was birchwood all over and birch bark. And I studied it a bit and read the history and the uses of birch. Birch is called betula betula in Latin, and it has a substance in the inner bark called betulin. And the betulin is an oil. It's a preservative, and all trees have some sorts of oils running inside of them. Um, to function as a bit of preservatives and to scare off predators and vermin, um, so that when the beetles and the worms bite into that tree, they'll go, "Oh, pooh, that tastes horrible. We're not going there. We go into something else." So they protect themselves. The trees protect themselves by having different oils in them. And in Betula betula, the birch, that preserving oil is called betulin. Now, the Swedes found out how to utilize that for many purposes. So, I'm going to show you a few things, household items I have that are made out of birch. I haven't made them myself, someone else has. This one is a little salt uh, tub. You can see I have salt in it. And this is birch bark. Now, how they did that and why they did that is very interesting because you can take the bark, the outer bark of the birch tree. Everybody knows a birch tree. That's the first tree we learn as children to recognize, and I believe it is in almost all of the world, the northern hemisphere anyway. Very easily recognizable with its white bark. But up here, the more northern you get, the more straight up the birch grows and without a lot of knobs in it. So the bark on the trees up here in northern and eastern in Sweden and up to Finland, they used to cut big slates off the birch bark because it was not hold. You can see on this one, it could actually grow very long. You can see there is a hole from a branch, and that's not very well to use. But this piece here is, yeah, no, the other side has a branch as well. but some pieces would be very, very even, like this piece here, very even and without holes in it from branches. They would cut very, very carefully in through the outer bark here and slide down, and then they would loosen this whole slate of birch bark, and the tree would grow on because you're very careful not to cut through the inner bark where all the nutrients run. So when you did that, you had these big slates of birch bark that you took home and you put under pressure. You can do it today. A lot of people do it today still, more in an artisan way than in actually a needed household way. But it was just a couple of 100 years ago maybe. And they made different vessels out of it. What they did as well, this is of course outer birch bark, but they also took the inner bark, and they didn't do that from the live trees because then it would die. But when you felled a tree anyway, to use it for firewood or for furniture construction, which birch is very, very fine for, you took the outer and the inner bark, and the inner bark was used inside of these vessels to turn this way in. And this one is a very small one. They made bigger buckets and barrels with lids on them to store flour, sugar, everything that they harvested, maybe, and then even potatoes and stuff, because the bituline in the inner bark is a preservative, and they found out that it would preserve the food that was put in it. So they had flour in them, and even butter and milk in birch jugs. I have a few more items. This is a more modern version of a little tray. I use it for my cutlery. And of course, these are split branches, maybe from pine wood. It can be from hickory. It can be from what's the one? Willow that I'm looking for. Willow, that they split the branches and used a half a branch to put around here. And in the old days, these are made. This one is made with metal nails put in through it, and that's a modern version. So this is probably a 70s version, just to be look smart. But in the old days, when they really used them and didn't have anything else in their kitchen supplies, they would just bore holes with a little spike to go through, and then they had little wooden splits from the birch that they put in, and it was held up by that. Glue, of course, they could make from tar, from pine trees, and they could make some glue if they needed glue, but this could be held up without glue. This is a little bit more decorative. There are people who really spent a long time making these very decorative, and this one is birch bark all the way through, on the inside, on the outside, on the bottom. Everything here is from birch bark. Birch bark was also used for roofing. The birch that grows up here in the north and more north in the northern parts of Sweden and in Finland grow slower because the winters are colder, and they grow with a thicker skin and a cleaner skin. So these slates were harvested and in the beginning of the summer and dried up, and then they were used like roof tiles covering each other, and then there was turf on top of these roofs. But the under roof was made with birch, layers of birch bark. So, and the inner bark, when you have cut down the trees, the inner bark with the bituline in it was taken. It's it's very much thicker. The outer bark is thin, and then there's a layer 1 millimeter thick, something like this thick underbark, full of betulene. And that bark was taken and dried, and it crumbles very easily. So it was mortared up and was as a fine flour, and it was mixed in with flour, and you can actually mix it in with 1/3 of wheat flour or rye flour and bake good bread from that. And why was that? Was it because they were so poor they had to eat the trees? That's what some ethnographs visiting wrote about in the beginning of the 1800s. No, it wasn't. It was because they knew that it contained preservatives, so there wouldn't go moth and larvae into their flour when using it. And it's good for you as well because it has other substances in it than just a normal wheat flour. They were not stupid. So this one is, you think, why is it so weirdly looking? It is because these are hangers that I make from, I don't know if they did it back in the day. I've seen it in Denmark. Some of my friends had some, and I've made them. When you cut this out of the top of a birch tree, and I do that when they have cut them down in the forest, they just leave them. They're not using that for lumber or anything anymore. They cut them down because they're in the way, and I can just cut the top off of them. When I do that, when the tree is fresh and newly cut, this is not brittle. They dry up. I cut off here, let them breathe here and here at both ends, and then I cut off the trees here and I round them a little bit with my knife. And these are very, very sturdy, and I use them to hang my cups. I have one in here in the kitchen where all my cups are hanging. I use them for hanging clothes. I make smaller ones, little ones that I sell on my Viking markets, and people buy them for mostly for their girls' rooms where they hang their necklaces and jewelry on them, and they're so durable and they just last forever. A birch tree like this, if it's left in the forest and this birch bark is not hurt in any way, but it sits around the tree, then this wood inside of it will become paper in 2 years, because as much as it holds the water out, it holds the moisture in. It cannot evaporate when the tree is just lying on the ground. So birch trees that just lie on the ground, they die, they wither, they become paper. The cellulose will simply dissolve inside of them and they become paper like in just a year or two, and absolutely useless for anything, even for firewood. So you have to cut it down, take it fresh, get it to breathe, get the bark out of it, or at least make sure that it's not lying in wet conditions. If it's in dry conditions, it becomes so durable. Now, I don't want to break. Of course, I could break this one if I wanted to. Or could I? It's very, very strong, very durable. So that's a little bit about the birch. And as firewood, I would just say any firewood has the same value per kilo, but it's not all firewood that weighs the same. So if you have oak, which is at the top level, it's much heavier, so you don't need as much to get the same value as you do with poplar or spruce that's at the bottom. Birch is not even in the middle, it's a bit higher up. So birch is very, very good for firewood. And in Denmark, where there's not so much birch, it's very valuable for open fireplaces. It's sold as firewood for open fireplaces because it's wonderful. It does not have resin in it, so it doesn't spark as much as it does. That's a little bit about the birchwood. Now I'm going to take some of mine and burn it because it gets cold in here. I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye from Professor Marlene.